I was standing in my kitchen, straightening my tie in the reflection of the microwave door, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost didn't pick it up. I was already running a few minutes behind, and my son had made it very clear at Christmas that being late to family dinners was something he considered personally offensive. I remember thinking that was a strange thing for him to be particular about, given everything I would later learn. But at that moment, I was just a 63-year-old man trying to get his collar straight and make it across town by 6 o'clock. The number on the screen was one I recognized but hadn't expected. It was Gary Hutchins. Gary had been the private wealth manager at First Heritage Bank for about 15 years, and he had handled my accounts since my wife Patricia passed away 4 years ago. Gary was not the kind of man who called in the evening. He was a 9-to-5 person, methodical, cautious, the type who sent follow-up emails after phone calls just to make sure everything was documented. So, when I saw his name on that screen at 5:40 on a Wednesday, I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic, not yet, just a quiet wrongness, the way the air feels before a storm you can't quite see. I picked up. "Gary," I said, "this is a surprise." There was a pause on his end that lasted just a beat too long. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I'm glad I caught you. I need you to come into the branch tomorrow morning, first thing. There are some things on your accounts I need to walk you through in person." I told him I had plans in the morning. He said it couldn't wait. I asked him if he could just tell me over the phone, and that's when his voice changed. It got quieter, more careful. "Sir," he said, "I think you should sit down for this." I didn't sit down. I leaned against the counter and stared at the little cactus Patricia had kept on the windowsill, the one I had never had the heart to move. And Gary Hutchins, careful, methodical Gary, told me something that made the whole room feel like it had tilted sideways. My son Daniel had been making withdrawals from my accounts for the past 14 months. Not small ones, over $240,000. He had done it with a power of attorney document, a document I had never signed. I didn't say anything for what felt like a very long time. I could hear Gary breathing on the other end, clearly uncomfortable, clearly wishing someone else had made this call. "Are you sure?" I finally said. It wasn't really a question. "Our fraud team flagged it last week," he said. "We cross-referenced the signature on the power of attorney with your account documents going back 12 years. Mr. Calloway, the signature is not yours. It's very close, but it isn't yours. We've already contacted our legal department." I thanked him. I told him I would be there first thing in the morning. I hung up the phone and stood in that kitchen for a long time, looking at Patricia's cactus, thinking about my son. Daniel was 41 years old. He was an operations manager at a logistics company, made decent money, owned a house in Riverside with his wife Karen. They had one child, my grandson Cooper, who was turning 7 that Saturday. The birthday party was the whole reason for this Wednesday dinner. Karen was planning it, had been planning it for weeks, and Daniel had called me twice in the past month to make sure I was coming. Both times he had brought up, almost casually, almost like an afterthought, that I should think about setting up a college fund for Cooper. Both times I had said I would think about it. Both times he had laughed and said no pressure. Of course, no pressure at all. I thought about those phone calls now in a way I hadn't before. I thought about the fishing trip we had taken last September, just the two of us, up near Lake Tahoe, the way Daniel had asked me, somewhere around the second evening, whether I had ever considered updating my estate documents now that his mother was gone. I had told him I had a good attorney handling all of that. He had nodded and said that was smart. That was really smart, Dad. And then he had changed the subject to football and I had thought nothing of it. I thought about the previous Christmas, when he had asked to borrow $20,000 to cover what he called a short-term cash flow problem at the house. I had given it to him without hesitation because he was my son and that is what you do. He had paid it back 3 months later, every cent, and I had been proud of him for that. I understood now that paying that back had been part of something deliberate. It had been him showing me I could trust him. While behind my back, he was using a forged document to empty my accounts piece by piece. I picked up my jacket from the chair by the door. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. Same face I had been looking at for 63 years. I looked older than usual, somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing myself more clearly. I drove to his house anyway. I want to explain something about that decision, because I know it might seem strange. I want you to understand why I didn't call the police that night, why I didn't call my attorney, why I got in my car and drove 20 minutes to my son's house for a dinner I no longer had any appetite for. I went because of Cooper. Cooper, who called me Grandpa Cal and climbed on my back like I was a jungle gym every time I walked through that door. Cooper, who had inherited his grandmother's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that I had loved for 38 years. Cooper, who I had pushed on the swings last summer until my arms ached because he kept asking for one more push. Just one more. Grandpa, please. That little boy had done nothing. He was going to be 7 years old on Saturday, and he deserved a grandfather who kept his head. So I kept my head. I parked in the driveway and sat in the car for 2 minutes, breathing steadily. I reminded myself that I did not yet know everything. I reminded myself that Gary Hutchins was thorough, but not infallible. I reminded myself that there could be an explanation, though somewhere below all of that careful reasoning, I already knew there wasn't. Karen met me at the door. She was warm, as she always was, hugged me and said I looked tired. Did I want a glass of wine before dinner? I told her water would be fine. Daniel came in from the living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel, smiled at me the way he always smiled, open and easy and completely without any sign that anything was different. Dad, he said, you made it. I made it, I said. We sat down to a dinner of roast chicken and green beans and the kind of small talk that fills up rooms without really saying anything. Karen talked about the party decorations for Saturday. Cooper sat beside me and told me at length about a video game he had been playing, something involving dinosaurs and a volcano, and I listened to every word with my whole heart because I knew that whatever was about to happen, whatever consequences were coming, this little boy's world was going to be shaken in ways he couldn't understand yet. I wanted him to have this memory of me listening, really listening. After Cooper was sent to do his homework, Karen excused herself to take a phone call from her sister. It was just Daniel and me at the table, and the silence between us was the quietest thing I had ever heard. He refilled his wine glass. He offered to refill mine. I told him no. Everything okay, Dad? He asked. You seem a little off tonight. I looked at my son across that dinner table. I thought about the day he was born, how I had stood in that hospital hallway and felt like the floor had dropped away beneath me in the best possible way. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike in the parking lot of a church on a Sunday morning, how he had fallen twice and gotten up both times without crying, and I had thought, this kid is going to be all right. I thought about the day he married Karen, how he had looked at me across the aisle and given me a small nod, and I had nodded back, and it had felt like something passed between us, some understanding about love and commitment and what it meant to build a life. I thought about $240,000. Gary Hutchins called me tonight, I said. He didn't flinch. I watched for it and it wasn't there. What was there instead was something smaller and more careful, a slight stillness around his eyes. Gary from the bank? He said. That's right. He took a sip of his wine. What did he need? He had some concerns about my accounts, I said, about some withdrawals over the past year or so, made using a power of attorney. There it was. Something moved across his face like a shadow and was gone in an instant, replaced by what I can only describe as a practiced version of confusion. He did it well. I might have believed it once. A power of attorney? He said. What kind of withdrawals? Dad, are you saying someone has been accessing your accounts without your knowledge? That's serious. We need to call the bank. Daniel, I said. He stopped. I know, I said. The practiced confusion held for another moment and then it didn't. His shoulders dropped by about half an inch. He set his wine glass down. He looked at the table. We sat like that for what felt like a long time. How much do they know? He finally said. And the fact that that was his first question. Not, I'm sorry. Not, it isn't what you think. Just how much do they know? Told me everything I needed to understand about where my son's mind was. Enough, I said. He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his face I hadn't expected. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that looked almost like relief. The way a person looks when they have been holding their breath for a very long time and have finally been allowed to stop. "We got into some trouble," he said. "About 18 months ago. Karen doesn't know. The business had an auditing problem. I got involved with some people I shouldn't have. I owed a significant amount, and I couldn't tell anyone about it because of how it happened." He paused. "I was going to pay it back. I had a plan." "You forged my signature," I said. He didn't answer. "Daniel," I said, "you forged my signature on a legal document. You took money from my accounts, money your mother and I saved over 40 years, money I was going to need for the rest of my life. And you did it without asking me, without telling me, without giving me the chance to help you or to say no. You made that choice for me." "I knew you'd say no," he said. "Of course I would have said no," I said, "because it was illegal, because it was my money, because you are a grown man and these were your debts and your mistakes and it was not my obligation to fix them by being robbed." He flinched at that word. "Good." Karen came back into the dining room. She looked at the two of us and stopped in the doorway. She had good instincts, Karen. She had always been able to read a room. "What's going on?" she said. Neither of us answered immediately, and in that gap she looked at her husband's face and something changed in her expression. She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, like her legs had decided to do it before her mind had agreed. "Daniel," she said. "Quiet. Careful. Karen," he said. "I'll explain everything. I promise I will explain everything." "You should explain it to her now," I said. "She has a right to know." What happened over the next hour I will not describe in full detail, because some of it belongs to Karen and not to me. But I will tell you that she had not known. I am absolutely certain of that. The shock on her face was not performed. The way she sat completely still with her hands flat on the table while my son talked, the way her voice shook when she finally spoke, the way she kept looking at me with an expression I can only describe as mortified grief that was not a woman who had known. She had been living in that house with a secret she didn't know was there, and it had been sitting underneath her life the whole time. At some point, she got up and went to check on Cooper. I heard her talking to him upstairs, heard his voice answering her, heard the particular cadence of a mother steadying herself for her child's sake. I knew that sound. I had heard Patricia do it 100 times. Daniel and I were alone again. "I'll fix it," he said. "I'll get a loan. I'll sell the car. Whatever I need to do. I'll pay you back every dollar." "That's not the only issue," I said. "Gary has already contacted the bank's legal department. There is a forged document. That doesn't go away because you write me a check." He was quiet. "I'm going to meet with Gary tomorrow morning," I said. "I'm going to meet with my attorney tomorrow afternoon. I'm not going to tell you what I decide to do, because I haven't decided yet, and frankly, it is no longer your decision to influence. What I am going to tell you is this." He looked at me. "Whatever happens between you and the bank, whatever happens legally, I will not allow it to affect Cooper. If your situation becomes such that Karen and Cooper need somewhere to go, my house is open to them. I am his grandfather, and that is not contingent on anything you have done or will do." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to make it sound like—" "I'm not making it sound like anything," I said. "I'm telling you the facts. Cooper is 7 years old. He did not make your choices. He doesn't pay for them." I stood up and pushed in my chair. I straightened my jacket. I was tired in a way that went all the way down to the floor, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. Karen came back downstairs. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry, Robert." Just like that. My first name. Like we were two people who had both been caught in something neither of us had chosen. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her the party on Saturday was still on as far as I was concerned, because Cooper was still turning 7 and that still mattered. She put her hand over her mouth and nodded. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for a long time before going inside. The neighborhood was quiet. Someone down the street had their porch light on. The sky was that deep blue it gets in the hour before it goes fully dark, and I sat in my car in my driveway and thought about Patricia. I thought about how she would have handled this, and I think she would have handled it with more grace than I had, but then she always did. She had a capacity for holding hard things gently that I had spent 38 years trying to learn from and never quite mastered. I thought about my son when he was Cooper's age, 7 years old, same as his own boy was about to be. I thought about the summer we drove to the Grand Canyon, how Daniel had stood at the rim and looked out and said, "Dad, is this real?" And I had said, "Yes, it's real." And he had shaken his head slowly like he couldn't quite process it. I thought about who that boy had been, and what had happened between that boy and the man at my dinner table tonight, and whether the distance between those two people was something that could ever be crossed. I didn't have an answer. I'm not sure I do even now. What I knew that night, sitting in my car, was simpler than all of that. I knew that I had done the right thing by going. I knew that Karen deserved to know the truth about her own life. I knew that Cooper deserved a grandfather who showed up, not just on birthdays and holidays, but in the hard moments, in the moments when the family needed someone steady. I knew that being steady was going to cost me something, was going to require me to hold an enormous amount of pain without letting it turn into something uglier. I went inside. I sat in the armchair where I always sit in the evenings, the one by the window where I can see the oak tree in the front yard. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, which is more than I usually allow myself, and I thought it was probably justified. The next morning I met with Gary at 9 o'clock. He was professionally gentle about the whole thing, which I appreciated. He walked me through every transaction, 14 months of them, methodical and thorough the way only Gary Hutchins can be. He told me the bank's position, what they were obligated to report, what my options were. I asked questions, and he answered them. By the end of the meeting, I understood the full shape of it. Not just the dollar amount, but the timeline, the pattern, the carefulness of it. Each withdrawal had been just under the reporting threshold. Whoever had advised my son on this had told him exactly how to do it. That detail bothered me more than almost anything else. My attorney was angrier than I was, which I found oddly comforting. He is 68 years old and has been practicing law for 40 years, and he has told me more than once that he has seen everything. He did not look like a man who had seen everything when I told him what Gary Hutchins had shown me that morning. He looked like a man who was personally offended. He told me my options clearly and without editorializing, which is also something I appreciated. And when I told him what I had decided, he looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Robert, are you sure?" And I told him I was, and he said, "All right then," and he started writing. I will tell you what I decided, but first I want to tell you about Saturday. Cooper's birthday party was held in the backyard of Daniel and Karen's house, which has a big oak tree with a tire swing that Cooper has never once gotten tired of. There were 8 children from his class, a sheet cake with a dinosaur on it, and more streamers than I thought one party truly required. Karen had been up since 6 in the morning getting everything ready. I arrived at 11 with a wrapped box containing the remote control car Cooper had mentioned wanting 11 separate times in the past 2 months. I know because I counted. Daniel was there. We did not speak privately. We were civil to each other in the way that 2 people can be when they have both decided, for the sake of the people around them, to hold everything else until later. He helped the kids with the relay race. He lit the candles on the cake. He put his arm around Karen when Cooper made his wish and blew them out, and she let him, and I thought that whatever was happening between them was theirs to figure out. Cooper sat in my lap for about 20 minutes after cake, which is unusual for a 7-year-old who has friends over and streamers to run through. He sat there and showed me pictures on his tablet of dinosaurs he was interested in, the long-necked ones, the ones that ate plants, not other dinosaurs. He was very clear about the distinction. I looked at every picture. I asked questions. He answered them with the very serious authority of a child who has done his research. When he finally climbed off to go back to his friends, he turned around and said, "Grandpa Cal, are you staying for the whole party?" And I told him yes, I was staying for the whole party. He nodded like that settled something important and ran back across the yard. Karen came and sat beside me. We watched the kids for a while without talking. "He told me everything," she said finally. "All of it." I nodded. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said. "I don't know what we're doing or where we are. But I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm not going to let Cooper lose you. He adores you. And you're a good man. You didn't have to come today." "Yes, I did," I said. She looked at me. "How are you doing?" "And I mean that, Robert. How are you actually doing?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, which is something I have been trying to do more since Patricia died. She always told me I moved too fast through my own feelings. like they were rooms I was just passing through to get somewhere else. "I'm sad," I said. "I'm angry. I'm tired. And I'm okay." I paused. All of those things at the same time. She nodded like she understood exactly what that felt like. What I decided, and what my attorney filed on my behalf the following Monday, was a civil claim for the forged document and the unauthorized withdrawals, with a negotiated repayment schedule that Daniel's attorney and mine worked out over the following 3 weeks. I did not pursue criminal charges. That decision was not made out of naivety or weakness. It was made with full awareness of what criminal charges would mean for Karen, for Cooper, for the family I still wanted to have some version of. My attorney respected it, even if he didn't fully agree with it. He told me it was my call to make and that he would make sure the civil terms were ironclad, and he kept his word. The repayment schedule is long. It will take years. Daniel will be paying me back for a long time, and every payment will be a reminder of what happened, and that is uncomfortable for both of us, and I think it should be. Comfortable forgiveness is not forgiveness. It is just forgetting, which is a different thing entirely. I also changed every account, every document, every piece of my financial life that could be touched by anyone other than myself. I updated my estate documents with my attorney present and a notary in the room and witnesses who were not members of my family. I did this methodically and without drama, and it took most of an afternoon. By the end of it, I felt something I had not expected. Not just security, something closer to clarity. Like I had rebuilt a wall that needed rebuilding, and it was solid now, and I was on the right side of it. The relationship with my son is what it is. It is not what it was. I don't know what it will become, and I have made a kind of peace with not knowing. We talk, not often, carefully. There are things underneath the conversation that neither of us goes near yet, and maybe we will get there someday, and maybe we won't. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that some distances don't close all the way. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is acknowledge that without pretending otherwise. Cooper slept over at my house 2 weekends ago. We ate pizza and watched a nature documentary about ocean animals, and he fell asleep on the couch halfway through the episode about giant squid. I carried him to the guest room and pulled the blanket up and stood in the doorway for a moment looking at him. This little boy with his grandmother's eyes, sleeping in my house, safe and completely unbothered by the things adults do to each other. I thought about Patricia. I thought about how she would have stood in this exact doorway doing exactly this. I thought about how much of a life is ordinary, and how much of a life is the hard parts, and how the hard parts don't cancel out the ordinary ones. The moments of sitting on a porch swing and hearing the neighborhood go quiet in the evening. The moments of a 7-year-old climbing into your lap to show you pictures of long-necked dinosaurs that eat plants. The moments of standing in a hospital hallway feeling the floor drop away beneath you in the best possible way because your son has just been born and you have no idea yet what the next 40 years will bring. It all happened. All of it. The good and the terrible and everything in between, and it is all still happening. I closed the guest room door and went back to the living room and sat in the blue light of the television. And I was tired and I was sad and I was angry and I was okay. All of those things at the same time. If you are going through something like this with someone you love, I want you to know that those things can be true simultaneously. You don't have to pick one. You are allowed to love someone and to hold them accountable and to protect yourself and to keep the door open for their child all at the same time. Those things are not in conflict. They are just the truth of it. The whole, complicated, difficult truth of loving a family that is imperfect, the way all families are imperfect, and choosing, every day, what kind of person you are going to be inside of that imperfection. That's what I have. That's the only wisdom I can offer. If this story meant something to you, I'd ask you to take a second and hit that like button. And if you want to be here for whatever comes next, I would be glad to have you. This channel, this little corner of the internet, is for people who know that life gets complicated and who want to talk about it honestly. You're always welcome here.